A motel, 16 rooms. A parking lot nobody uses anymore. She counted the keys 3 times before she believed what she was seeing. 17. 1 key, no number, no name. Just brass worn smooth from years of being held by someone who never used it, or someone who used it once and never came back. Behind the wall, between room 8 and room 10, there was a door that wasn't supposed to exist. It had been there for 27 years. So had the coat on the hook, the suitcase under the chair, the tape in the drawer with 4 words written by hand. Please let them know. She turned the key. The lock opened. And whatever her grandfather had been hiding in that room, whatever he'd spent 24 years writing letters about and never sending, was about to become her problem. She wasn't ready. She went in anyway. She had $43. That was the number. Not approximately, not roughly. $43 and some change she'd stopped counting. Because counting the change felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. The Honda had a cracked rear bumper from a parking lot in Renton, where someone had backed into her and driven away. The duffel bag in the back seat smelled like the parking lot she'd been sleeping in for 7 weeks. The blue blazer she kept folded separately so it wouldn't wrinkle still looked like a blazer a professional woman wore to interviews. Which was the point. Every morning she woke up before the lot got busy. She heated water in a thermos she'd bought at a Goodwill for $2. She brushed her teeth in the Safeway bathroom during the window between the overnight stalker leaving and the manager arriving. She changed in the back seat. She put on the blazer. She drove to whatever temp agency or hospital HR office had agreed to see her that day. She looked exactly like a woman who had somewhere to go. She was 38 years old, and she had not had somewhere to go in 7 weeks. This was the part she hadn't told anyone. Not Diane. Not her mother. Not the 2 friends she'd had lunch with in September, who had asked how things were going, and she had said fine, busy, you know how it is, and they had nodded, because they did know how it was, or thought they did. The parking lot behind the Safeway on Southeast Petrovitsky Road was quiet between 2 and 5 in the morning. That was the window. She'd learned it the way you learn things you never expected to need to learn, through repetition and necessity, and the slow erosion of the story you'd been telling yourself about who you were. She had been a care coordinator at Maplewood Assisted Living in Renton for 11 years. She'd been good at it. Not just competent good. The kind of good that meant families called her specifically when their person was having a hard week, when something had shifted in a way that needed explaining, when they needed someone to sit with them at the table and tell them the truth without making it worse than it already was. The marriage had ended 2 years ago. Craig had not been unkind about it. That was the strange thing looking back. He hadn't been unkind about any of it. He'd said, I think we stopped seeing each other a long time ago, and she'd sat with that for a while and then said, I think you're right. And then they'd divided the furniture with the same careful fairness they'd applied to most things in their marriage, which had been good at fairness, if not always at the other things. She didn't blame him. She didn't blame herself. She blamed nothing and nobody, and sometimes that was the hardest version. The job ended 8 months after the marriage. Budget restructuring. Her supervisor had used the word consolidation 4 times in a 10-minute meeting. She'd counted because counting was easier than listening. She'd walked out with a box of personal items and a severance check that covered 3 months of rent and then didn't. The apartment went 6 months after that. She'd tried. She'd applied to every facility in the county. She'd applied to home care agencies. She'd applied to hospital positions she was slightly overqualified for, and slightly underqualified for, and exactly qualified for, and the exactly qualified ones were the ones that never called back, which she found philosophically interesting in her darker moments. She'd packed the duffel bag on a Tuesday morning in August. She'd driven out of the apartment parking lot and not driven back. That was 7 weeks ago. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself that every morning, when she woke up in the back seat with the thermos and the blazer and the $43, she told herself it was a situation, not a life. She told herself she was between things. She told herself a lot of things in the dark hours before the Safeway opened and the lot started filling up. Then the phone rang at 8:14 on a Tuesday morning and everything she'd been telling herself became beside the point. The lawyer's name was Brian Welch. He had a Bellingham area code. and the measured voice of a man who delivered difficult news often enough to have developed a pace for it. He said, "I'm handling the estate of Walter Callahan." He said, "I'm sorry for your loss." He said, "There's a will, and I need to speak with you about the contents." She sat up in the back seat. Walter, her grandfather, 81 years old, owner of a motel in a small town called Fern Crossing that she hadn't visited in 4 years. She'd sent him a card at Christmas. He'd sent her one back, in his leftward-leaning handwriting, with a $20 bill tucked inside the way he'd been doing since she was 8. She hadn't used the 20. She'd kept it in the card. She drove north. Fern Crossing sat in a valley between 2 ridges in eastern Washington, where the highway narrowed and the trees came close. Fewer than 3,000 people. One main street with a diner, a hardware store, a post office the size of a large closet, a gas station on the north end. The kind of town where the same families had owned the same businesses for 3 generations and everyone knew which houses had been for sale too long. Cedar Ridge Motel was at the south edge of town. She turned into the lot and sat in the car for a moment before getting out. 16 rooms in 2 rows facing each other across a strip of cracked asphalt. A covered walkway ran along the front of each row. The sign, the kind with individual plastic letters on a backlit board, leaned 5 degrees toward the road. Several letters had fallen off or been removed or simply given up. It now read Cedar Ridge Motel. She looked at it for a while. The lawyer had said, total asset. She was still working out what that meant. She got out of the car. The air was different here than in Renton, cleaner, colder, with the mineral edge that comes from elevation and stone. October in the mountains. The sky was the particular pale blue that meant cold without clouds. She picked up her duffel bag and walked to the office. The key the lawyer had given her fit the door on the first try. Inside, a front desk, a computer that was probably 10 years old, a filing cabinet, a rack of folded local maps that nobody used anymore because everyone used their phones. Behind the desk was a board on the wall with 2 rows of hooks. She counted the keys. She counted them again. 17. She walked back out and counted the room doors. 8 on the left row, 8 on the right. She walked the length of both rows slowly, counting again. Came back. Stood at the board. 16 rooms, 17 keys. 15 keys had numbered tags. One had a tag that said office, and then the 17th plain brass, slightly older looking than the others, hanging on the last hook at the end of the bottom row. No tag. No number. Just a key. She took it down. Turned it over in her palm. The head was plain, no decorative cut. The shaft was worn smooth in a way that came from use or from being held often or from both. She stood with it in her hand for a moment and then put it in her jacket pocket because 17 keys for 16 rooms was a question she didn't have the energy for right now. Right now she needed to know if the plumbing worked. It did. Barely. She spent the rest of the afternoon going through the motel the way she'd learned to assess things methodically, without flinching, noting what could be fixed and what couldn't. Room 2 had a window that didn't close flush. Room 4 had a pipe under the bathroom sink showing rust at the joint. The kind of rust that was a warning, not yet a problem. Room 9's door was swollen in the frame and she pushed at it twice before deciding to come back. Room 11 had water damage on the ceiling in the far corner. Dried and brown, the stains spread wide. Room 14 was actually fine. The floors were solid. The window closed properly. The bathroom fixtures worked without drama. She filled 2 pages of her notebook. She found the utility folders in the filing cabinet. 4 months of electric. 2 months of water. A property tax notice from the county with a due date in January. She added the numbers in her head, the way she'd been adding numbers for 7 weeks. She was still standing at the filing cabinet doing the arithmetic when headlights swept through the office window. Diane. Her sister had called from SeaTac 3 hours ago. Nora had said, "Fine, there's a room." They'd had the kind of conversation that felt like 2 people carefully not saying what they were actually thinking, which was a thing they'd gotten very good at over the past several years. Diane Callahan was 42, 4 years older. A senior accountant at a firm in Portland with opinions about interest rates and a backup phone charger in her purse, and the posture of someone who had decided early that being organized was a form of self-respect. She was not difficult, she was not unkind. She was simply a person who looked at situations and immediately began calculating what could be extracted from them, which was not a flaw so much as a methodology. She came through the door looking at her phone. "The highway exit has no signage," she said. "I know, I nearly missed it, too." She looked up, scanned the office, the desk, the filing cabinet, the rack of maps, the keyboard. Then she looked at Nora with the particular expression she reserved for situations that confirmed something she'd already suspected. "What's the Wi-Fi password?" "Haven't found it yet." "Is there Wi-Fi?" "There's a router. I assume it's connected to something." "Where are you sleeping?" "Room 14. The floor's solid, and the window closes." Diane walked to the window and looked out at the motel rows. She looked at the leaning sign. She looked at the walkway where 2 of the overhead lights were dead. She did the thing she did when she was cataloging, her eyes moving with a kind of quiet efficiency that had always reminded Nora of a scanner. Then she turned around and opened her phone and held it out. "Dennis Marsh," she said. "He sold Mom's house, you remember." "I remember. He has a contact. Developer who's been buying highway-adjacent properties in this valley for 3 years. He thinks based on the acreage and the road access he thinks we could get 160. Maybe 170 if we move before December." Nora looked at the phone, at the number on the screen. "You called a realtor." "I called someone who can help us figure out what this is worth." "You called him before you called me." Diane lowered the phone slightly. "I called you from the airport after the realtor." A pause. Brief. Diane didn't deny it. That was one thing about her sister. She didn't deny things that were true. It was one of the things Nora had always respected about her, even when it was infuriating. "Split evenly," Diane said. 80,000 each. Clean. No property taxes, no leaking pipes. No, she glanced through the window at the motel. Whatever's happening with that sign. Nora looked at the keyboard, at the 17 keys, at the one with no tag, the last one on the row, the one currently in her jacket pocket. "Give me 10 days, she said. "To do what?" "To look at what we have." Diane's expression shifted. The patience shift. The small tightening around the eyes that had been there since they were in their 20s. 10 days, she said. "And then I want a real number. I'll have something to tell you." Diane nodded once. She was already looking at her phone again. "I'm at the Hampton in Bellingham. Call me if anything catches fire." She left. Her rental car moved out of the lot and onto the highway, and its taillights disappeared around the curve. Nora stood in the office. She reached into her pocket and took out the 17th key. She looked at it under the desk lamp for a moment. Then she put it back on the hook with the others and went to find room 14. The dog appeared the next morning. She'd left the office door open to get some air, and he was simply there, old yellow Labrador, white around the muzzle and above the eyes, moving with the careful gait of a dog whose back legs had started to disagree with the rest of him. He stood at the edge of the doorway and looked at her with the calm assessment of an animal that has already decided whether it trusts someone and is simply waiting for them to catch up. She looked back. "Whose are you?" He walked in past her like she'd extended a formal invitation. She found the food bowls behind the front desk ceramic, with a pattern of small pine trees around the rim, both bowls clean and dry. Beside them was a bag of dry food, still half full. In the center desk drawer, she found a business card from a veterinary clinic in Fern Crossing, the dog's name written in Walter's handwriting on the back, Rex. She stood in the middle of the office with the vet card in her hand. Rex sat next to the food bowls and looked at her with the expression dogs have when they're waiting for you to do the obvious thing. She filled the bowl. She told herself she wasn't keeping him. She told herself this with reasonable conviction. Then she stopped telling herself things about it and got back to the motel. She found the cassette player while going through the office more carefully that morning, not the surface, which she'd done, but the underneath, the backs of drawers, the gap behind the filing cabinet, the storage closet she'd opened and closed without really looking into. The player was in the storage closet, in a box under a stack of phone directories from 2003. She put it on the desk and kept going. She went back to the west wing, room 9, the swollen door. She put her shoulder into it this time, and it gave sticky at first, then swinging inward with a sound that was more protest than resistance. The smell was immediate. Not bad, just old. The particular stillness of air that has been the same air in the same room for a very long time. She let her eyes adjust. The room looked like any motel room from 25 years ago. Standard single bed against the left wall, made up with a plaid blanket. The pattern faded, but the bed clearly made by someone who meant it. A wooden chair in the corner beside a small writing desk. A nightstand with a lamp and a water glass, the water long gone, just a dried ring at the bottom. A hook near the door with a brown wool coat on it, mid-weight, the kind a man might wear in early March in Washington state. A suitcase under the chair, leather old, with metal clasps. She walked to the desk, one drawer, she pulled it open. A motel registration card, the paper yellowed to ivory at the edges. She lifted it carefully. Name, Thomas Greer. Check-in, March 4, 1997. Checkout blank. She looked at that blank line for a long time. In the corner of the drawer, behind where the card had been sitting, was a cassette tape. She picked it up. Standard size. On the label, 4 words in black ink, handwriting she didn't recognize. Please let them know. She stood in the middle of the room with the tape in one hand and the card in the other. Outside, she could hear Rex moving on the walkway. She took both back to the office. She loaded the batteries she'd found in the desk drawer into the cassette player. Pressed play. Static. Then a voice. Male, low. Tired in a way that wasn't about sleep. My name is Thomas Greer. She stopped breathing. If someone is hearing this, I may not have gotten out of Fern Crossing. Rex came and lay down under the desk. Thomas Greer spoke for 11 minutes. He spoke carefully, the way someone speaks when they're aware of how much time they may or may not have. He described meetings held after hours at Cedar Ridge in the back room. He described payments cash, mostly. Some checks written in ways designed to be unremarkable. He described 7 families in the Fern Crossing Valley, small landowners, farming families, people who'd bought a few acres because land was cheap here and they wanted space. In early 1997, each family had received an official-looking notice from the county assessor's office. The notice stated that their property was under consideration for a public easement, that the county might need to run a road or utility corridor through the land. The language was careful, nothing was certain, but the implication was there. Your land's value is at risk. You may want to consider selling before the situation becomes complicated. The families had sold, most of them within 6 months. Some held out longer, but the offers kept coming, reasonable offers, fair on the surface given what the notices implied, and eventually they all sold. To a company called Valley Horizon Partners, which was a shell. The money behind it came from a real estate developer named Harris Caldwell, and several silent investors whose names Greer said he was still trying to confirm. The county official who had sent the fabricated notices was named Raymond Holt, a mid-level employee in the assessor's office. Not powerful. Just someone with access to official letterhead and a reason to use it. Greer's voice stayed even through all of this. Then it changed. Harris Caldwell knows I'm asking questions. He paused, breathed, and Walter Callahan knows why. The tape ran for another 40 seconds. Greer describing where he'd left copies of certain documents, in language just cautious enough that Nora couldn't fully parse it. Then it clicked off. She sat at the desk for a long time. Rex didn't move. She played the tape again. Walter Callahan knows why. She took the tape out of the player and held it in both hands. Turned it over. Set it down. Picked up the registration card. Thomas Greer. March 4, 1997. The blank checkout line. She was very still. Then she started going through the office the way she should have started, not looking for what was visible but for what was meant to be missed. She went through every drawer, twice. She moved the filing cabinet away from the wall and looked behind it. She opened the storage closet and went through every box. She found the floorboard by accident. She was pulling back the desk chair to sit down, and one rear leg caught on something. She looked down, one board slightly higher than those around it. Not much. Just enough. She got the flathead screwdriver from the maintenance closet, pried up the edge. The board came free. A small metal box, gray paint, rust at the corners, locked. She found the key taped to the underside of the center desk drawer. The tape had dried out and the key nearly fell when she slid the drawer open. She caught it, Her hands were not entirely steady. She opened the box. No money, no deed, no single document that explained everything. Letters, a lot of them, folded, some still in envelopes, some loose, all in Walter's leftward-leaning handwriting. She picked up the top one. Thomas, it began. She set it down. She picked up the one at the bottom instead, then sorted them by date. Found one from 1997, one from 1999, 2004, 2018. She held them in a stack and thought about what it meant to write to the same person for more than 20 years. She opened the 1997 letter. Walter wrote it in the fall of that year. He wrote about the meetings he'd allowed them at Cedar Ridge, because Caldwell had been a regular guest for 3 years, and the request had come in a way that felt like something Walter couldn't easily refuse, not with threats, just with the quiet authority of someone who expected accommodation, use of the back room, occasional, discreet. Walter had agreed. He'd told himself he didn't know what the meetings were about. He'd told himself that for about 2 months. Then Caldwell had asked him to sign something. A document describing Cedar Ridge as a business partner in a local development initiative. The language was vague. Walter had signed it. There was a check. He'd taken it. Then Thomas Greer had checked into room 9 on March 4th with a leather suitcase and a recorder, and questions Caldwell had already told Walter to discourage. Walter had known who Greer was before he arrived. Caldwell had told him described Greer as a reporter from Seattle who was causing trouble, suggested that if Greer asked questions, Walter should mention the Valley Project was entirely above board. Walter had said he would. He'd read the registration card, looked at the name, and thought about the families, so he hadn't said anything to Greer. He'd given him the room. He'd stayed out of it. 2 days later, Greer was gone. His coat on the hook, his suitcase under the chair, his tape in the drawer. Walter had found the tape within a week. He'd listened to it. He'd stood in the middle of room 9 with the cassette player in his hands and listened to 11 minutes of a man documenting things Walter already knew were true. And then Walter had sealed the room. She read the 1999 letter. Raymond Holt's name appeared for the first time. Walter had traced certain documents to an employee in the county assessor's office who had the right access and a salary too small to feel adequate. He wrote, "He's still working there. Raymond Holt is still in that office, and I drive past the building on my way to the hardware store." She underlined that sentence. She read the 2004 letter. Walter had thought about going to the police, had written 3 drafts of what he might say, thrown all 3 away. By then Caldwell was established, respected, and Walter couldn't see clearly how an accusation from a small motel owner would land. She read the 2011 letter. Walter wrote that his health was beginning to show its age. Not serious yet, but enough that he thought about time differently now. He'd kept the room sealed because he couldn't bring himself to destroy what Thomas had left. He wrote, "If I open it and clear it out, I'm the last person who knows this happened. I can't be that." She read all 22 letters over the course of the afternoon. Rex slept under the desk. The October light moved across the office floor and changed color as the hours passed. In the letter from 2019, Walter's handwriting had grown larger, the way handwriting does when the hand starts to have its own opinions. He wrote that he was leaving Cedar Ridge to Nora. He wrote that he didn't know if she would find the room. He wrote that he hoped she would. Then he crossed out hoped and wrote above it, needed. She found the last letter at the very bottom of the box. It wasn't addressed to Thomas, just Nora. On the front, in handwriting shakier than any of the others, written near the end. She held it without opening it. She wasn't ready. She knew this about herself. She knew when she was at the edge of something that required more preparation than she currently had. She'd learned it in care work, those moments in a room, when someone was about to say something that would change everything, and she'd needed to be fully present for it. She wasn't fully present right now. She was in the parking lot, metaphorically. She needed to get all the way into the room first. She put the letter back in the box. She photographed everything, every letter, every document she'd found in room 9, the registration card, the tape, the outside of Walter's last envelope without opening it. She uploaded copies to 3 accounts and sent another set to her friend Pauline in Tacoma with a message, "Don't open this unless I ask you to. Or unless you stop hearing from me." She sent it and looked at what she'd written. "Or unless you stop hearing from me." She looked out at the empty parking lot. She told herself she was being overcautious. She told herself this was a small town in Washington, not a movie. She told herself that 27 years was a long time, and whatever had made Thomas Greer leave his coat and his tape behind had happened in 1997, and people moved on and forgot and built other things on top of what they'd done. She told herself all of that, and then she made sure the cloud backup was complete. She called Diane at 6. "How's the plumbing?" Diane said. "Mostly functional. The roof? One section above room 3 that needs attention. The rest seems solid." Nora. A pause. "Do you have a number yet?" "Not yet. It's been 2 days. I know how long it's been. The developer contact I know, Diane. I need a few more days." Another pause. The patient's breath through the nose. "How many more days?" 3. "That's 13 total. I know the math." "Fine," Diane said. 3 more days. "And then we have a real conversation." She hung up. Nora sat at the desk. Rex had moved from under the desk to the door, where he was looking out at the parking lot with his particular focused stillness. She looked at the keyboard. 16 keys, all numbered, and the 17th, back on its hook after the afternoon, in her pocket. She took it down again. She walked down the walkway to room 9. She stood in the doorway and looked at the room. The coat on the hook, the suitcase under the chair, the registration card's blank checkout line. The lamp she couldn't turn on because the wiring in this room was disconnected from the rest of the building. She looked at the brown coat. She walked to it, checked the pockets. Right pocket, empty. Left pocket, a folded receipt from a diner in Fern Crossing. 2 coffees. A slice of pie, dated March 6, 1997. 2 days after Thomas Greer checked in. She refolded the receipt and placed it on the desk, next to where the registration card usually sat. She looked at the room one more time. Then she walked back to the office, sat down at the desk and opened her notebook to a fresh page. At the top she wrote, "Thomas Greer." Below that, March 4, 1997. Below that she drew a line, and under the line she started writing everything she knew, everything she didn't know, and the shape of the space between those 2 things. Rex came and rested his chin on her knee. She scratched his ear without looking away from the page. Outside, the October dark had come down fully now, and somewhere down the highway a truck was passing. And in room 9 the coat hung on its hook, and the suitcase waited under the chair, and the 17th key sat on the desk beside her notebook, waiting to see what she would do with it. She read every letter twice before she made the second pot of coffee. Then she read them a 3rd time. Slowly. The way you read something when you're trying to understand not just what happened, but how a person traveled from one version of themselves to another without noticing the distance, because that's what the letters were. Not a confession in any legal sense. Not a document designed to be read. They were a record of a man watching himself become someone he hadn't planned to be, and then living inside that for 24 years. Writing to someone he believed was dead, because writing was the only honest thing he had left to do. The early ones were the hardest. The handwriting still precise. Still the leftward lean she knew from birthday cards and the notes he tucked into Christmas packages. Walter wrote about the meetings at Cedar Ridge without softening the facts of them. Caldwell had approached him in late 1996. Had been a regular guest for 3 years by then, the kind of man who moved through small towns with a quiet authority that made people want to accommodate him without quite understanding why. The request had felt reasonable in the way that certain requests feel reasonable when the person making them already knows you'll say yes. Use of the back room for private meetings. Occasional, discreet. Walter had agreed. He'd told himself he didn't know what the meetings were about. He'd maintained that for approximately 2 months. Then Caldwell had produced a document. It described Cedar Ridge as a business partner in a local development initiative. The language was designed to be vague. Walter had signed it. There had been a check, not a large one. Enough. He'd taken it. He'd cashed it. And then Thomas Greer had checked into room 9 on March 4th, carrying a leather suitcase and a recorder, and questions Caldwell had already warned Walter about. Caldwell had described Greer as a reporter from Seattle, causing trouble. Had suggested, not demanded, just suggested, in that particular way of his, that if Greer asked questions, Walter should mention the Valley Project was entirely legitimate, that the families involved had sold their land willingly and at fair prices. Walter had said he would do that. Then he'd looked at the registration card, Thomas Greer, and thought about the Fenn family, about the Harrisons, about a family who'd farmed the same 40 acres for 30 years and sold because a letter told them not to wait. And Walter hadn't said anything to Greer. He'd given him room 9. He'd stayed out of it. 2 days later, Greer was gone. Coat on the hook, suitcase under the chair, tape in the drawer. Walter had found the tape within a week. He'd listened to all 11 minutes of it standing in the middle of that room, and then he'd sealed the door and painted it to match the wall, and planted ivy at the base and gone back to running the motel. She set the 1997 letter down. She picked up the one from 1999. This was where Raymond Holt's name appeared for the first time. Walter had been going through paperwork he'd signed, finally reading it properly, with a lawyer friend in Bellingham who owed him a favor and had traced certain documents back to a mid-level employee in the county assessor's office. Holt had been the one who generated the notices. He'd had access to official letterhead, official formatting, official envelopes. The families had received documents that looked exactly like government correspondence, because they'd come from inside a government office, just not from anyone with the authority to send them. Walter wrote, "He's still working there. Raymond Holt still has his desk in that building, and I drive past it on my way to the hardware store." She'd underlined that sentence the first time she read it. She underlined it again. Drove past his office building on the way to the hardware store. Fern Crocking was fewer than 3,000 people. Raymond Holt had fabricated government documents to defraud 7 families of land they'd owned for generations, and Walter had driven past his building twice a week for 25 years buying nails and drop cloths and pipe fittings. She read the 2004 letter. Walter had thought about going to the police. He'd written 3 drafts of what he might say. He described the drafts, what they contained, where they broke down, why he'd thrown each one away. By 2004, Caldwell had built a reputation in the county, was on boards, had donated to the library, had the particular kind of standing that makes accusations from small motel owners seem like grievances rather than facts. So Walter had thrown away the 3rd draft and not written a 4th. The 2011 letter was the one that stayed with her longest. Walter wrote that his health had started announcing itself. Nothing critical yet, but enough that he'd begun thinking about time in a different way, not as something infinite ahead of him, but as something with a shape. He wrote that he'd kept the room sealed because he couldn't bring himself to destroy what Thomas had left. He wrote, "If I open it and clear everything out, then I'm the last person alive who knows this happened. The last one carrying it. And I can't be that. I won't be the last one." She sat back. Rex was asleep under the desk. His breathing was slow and even. Outside the office window, the morning had come fully now. The thin, clean light of October in eastern Washington. The kind that showed you everything but warmed nothing. She thought about what it costs to know something and not say it. Not the abstract version of that cost. The daily one. The way it lives in the chest at different weights on different mornings, depending on how you slept and what you ate, and whether you happened to drive past a particular building on your way, somewhere ordinary. The way it calculates itself against everything you've built, the motel, the routine, the reputation for making good coffee and wins. Because the thing you've built always feels more fragile than it actually is when you're afraid. Walter had paid that cost for 24 years. She wasn't sure. She was angry at him. She wasn't sure she wasn't. She was sure of one thing she understood, in a way she hadn't 48 hours ago, why he'd left Cedar Ridge to her and not to Diane. Diane would have made the efficient decision. Nora was going to make a different kind. She still didn't know exactly what kind, but she knew it wasn't the efficient one. She photographed everything again, the letters in order, front and back, each one separately, and checked that all 3 cloud backups had synced. Then she called Pauline in Tacoma and said, "I sent you something. Don't look at it unless I ask you to. Pauline said, "Is everything okay?" Nora said, "I don't know yet." Pauline said, "That's not a reassuring answer." Nora said, "I know. I'll call you when I know more." She hung up and sat with the phone for a moment. Then she went to make the second pot of coffee. Gus Vallow knocked on the office door the following morning. She almost didn't answer. She'd been up since 5 going through county property records on the motel's Wi-Fi, which operated at a speed suggesting the internet was still considered experimental in this part of Washington. Unknown knocks had started to carry the same weight as unknown phone numbers. Possible bad news in a different delivery format. But Rex went to the door and stood there, not with his hackles up, not growling, just standing with a kind of attentive calm that seemed like information worth considering. She opened it. Old man, 70, maybe a year or two past. Flannel shirt in a blue-green plaid washed so many times it had gone soft as cotton. Jeans with real dirt on the knees from actual use. Work boots. He was holding a thermos, which meant he'd brought his own coffee, which meant he'd planned to be here for a while, which meant she needed to decide quickly whether that was good or bad. "Miss Callahan," he said. "That's me. I heard someone opened room 9. She looked at him steadily. "Who told you that?" "Nobody told me." He glanced down at Rex, who had come to sit beside her ankle. "I live 4 houses down. I've been watching this motel for 10 years waiting for someone to open room 9. When your lights went on in the West Wing at 10 o'clock Tuesday night, I figured that was probably what happened." She looked past him at the street. 4 houses down. A bungalow with a porch light still burning from the night before. "You've been watching the motel," she said. "I have. For 10 years I have." She stepped back from the door. He came in, walked to the chair across from the desk, sat down without being invited, which under other circumstances might have bothered her. But there was something about the way he did it, not presumptuous, just certain, that suggested he'd been rehearsing this particular entrance for longer than 10 years. "Gus Vallow," he said. "I was a reporter, not a large operation, the Fern Crossing Gazette. 8 pages printed on Thursdays. We ran for 40 years and folded in 2009 when the advertising stopped covering the printing costs. You knew Thomas Greer." He looked at the stack of letters on the desk. He didn't touch them. "We worked the same story in 1997. Different publications. He was filing for a paper in Seattle doing a feature on land development patterns in rural Washington counties, how small landowners were being pressured out in advance of development projects. He called me because I knew the local angle. We shared some notes, met twice in person, and when he disappeared," Gus was quiet for a moment. He set the thermos on the edge of the desk. Didn't open it. "I received an envelope," he said. "No return address. No letter inside. Just a photograph." He looked at the window. "My daughter. She was 19. Attending university in Spokane. The photo was taken from across a parking lot. From a distance. She was walking to her car and she had no idea anyone was there. The office was very quiet. Rex didn't move. I understood what the envelope meant," Gus said. "I stopped making calls that afternoon. I stopped asking questions. I told myself I would come back to it, that I would find a safer way. And then the weeks went by and the months went by, and Thomas didn't surface anywhere, and eventually he stopped. Eventually I just stopped. You assumed he ran. I told myself he ran. It was easier." He turned back from the window and looked at her directly. "For about a year I told myself that. Then I stopped telling myself anything and just went quiet about the whole thing, which is a different kind of cowardice, but still cowardice." She looked at him. "Why are you here now?" "Because you opened the room." He picked up his thermos, set it down again. "And because I'm 70 years old and I have been sitting 4 houses from that motel for 10 years, watching it stay sealed, and I am genuinely exhausted by the weight of something I should have done a long time ago." She thought about the letters in the box, about Walter writing to a dead man for 24 years because writing was the only honest thing left. "Do you know where Thomas went?" she said. "I don't. I believed he was dead for a long time." A pause. "I'm less certain of that than I used to be." "What changed?" "The people who sent me that envelope wanted silence." "Not necessarily." He chose the word carefully, permanence. "Those are different objectives. And in 27 years there have been no other disappearances. No other reporters who stopped filing. Just the one. Just Thomas. She sat with that. She thought about the brown coat on the hook. About how you don't leave your coat if you're planning to be gone permanently. You leave your coat if you left in a hurry. If leaving quickly mattered more than taking the coat. She thought about the suitcase under the chair. She didn't say any of that aloud, but she thought it. Diane came back 2 days later. She arrived at 11 in the morning, which meant she'd driven down from Bellingham rather than flying, which meant she'd wanted the time in the car to think, which meant this visit was different from the first one. She walked in, looked at the letters arranged on the desk, looked at Nora, looked at Rex. "The dog is new," she said. "Walter's. I found his bowls behind the desk. Walter didn't have a dog the last time I visited." "When was the last time you visited?" Diane considered that. "Christmas before last. He got Rex sometime before that. The vet card is dated 2015. So Rex was 9 years old. Not as ancient as he sometimes moved, but old enough." Diane looked at him. Rex looked at her with the calm appraisal he gave everyone assessing, not hostile. "Okay," Diane said, and sat down. She picked up the first letter and read it, set it down, picked up the second, read that too. She read 7 letters before she said a word. "He signed documents." "Yes." "And took money." "Yes." "And then sealed the room instead of calling anyone." "Yes." Diane set down the letter she was holding. She looked at the cassette tape on the corner of the desk. "That's the reporter's recording?" "Thomas Greer. Recorded March 1997. Have you listened to it?" 3 times. Diane looked at the stack of remaining letters. She was doing the accounting in her head. Nora had always been able to tell when Diane was doing internal arithmetic, because her eyes went slightly unfocused, while everything else in her face stayed very still. Like she was running 2 processes simultaneously. "What do you want to do?" Diane said finally. "I don't know yet." "Yes, you do." She looked at her. "You wouldn't have asked me to come down if you didn't already know." She was right. She was usually right about that specific thing, not about what Nora would decide, but about whether Nora had already decided it. "I want to find out what happened to Thomas Greer," Nora said. "I want to get this information to someone who can actually do something with it. And I want to do it before anyone realizes what's in this building." Diane was quiet. "And the motel," she said. "That's a separate question." "It's not separate. It's the same question. If you go public with this, the motel becomes part of the story. Every buyer is going to know what happened here. Maybe that's not the worst thing." Diane. She looked at the letters. At 22 years of undelivered apologies stacked in a metal box under a false floorboard, Walter spent 24 years not doing the thing he should have done. "I'm not going to spend 10 days doing the same thing." The silence after that had weight in it. Diane looked at the letter she'd set down. "Read the bottom half again. The part about driving past Raymond Holt's building, on the way to the hardware store." Nora watched her read it. Then Diane set it down with a care that was different from how she'd set down the others. She didn't say anything more about selling. Not right then. Harris Caldwell came on a Thursday afternoon. He didn't call ahead. He didn't send anyone. He simply parked a dark blue sedan in the Cedar Ridge lot. At 2:15, clean car, late model, the kind that communicated something without trying to, and got out slowly with a cane. 78 years old. Tall even now, the height still there, even if some of the ease of it had gone. White hair combed back from the face. Navy vest over a gray shirt, both pressed. He moved across the parking lot with the deliberate steadiness of a man who had accepted that speed was no longer one of his advantages and had decided that deliberateness would serve instead. Nora was at the front desk. She watched him cross the lot through the office window. She did not move. He came through the door, looked at the desk, at the letters, at the tape, at her. "Miss Callahan," he said. His voice was exactly what she'd expected. The voice of a man who had spent decades in rooms where what he said was the thing people listened to. It still carried that. Age had lowered it somewhat, but the authority was still there, like a structure that had lost some ornamentation but kept its frame. "Mr. Caldwell." He looked around the office once, then settled his attention on her. "Your grandfather was a good man," he said. "He made some choices that weren't. He made one bad decision in difficult circumstances, and he carried the weight of it for the rest of his life. That kind of weight is its own punishment. He said it without particular feeling. Just placement of facts. The families who sold their land in 1997. Is their loss its own punishment too? Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger. Calculation. The specific calculation of a man assessing how much a problem has grown since he last checked on it. I'd like to make this simple for you, he said. Cedar Ridge is a significant piece of real estate. The highway access, the acreage, a brief look through the window, even in its current condition. I'm prepared to offer $210,000. Cash, title transfers in 30 days. You walk away with enough to start over. She looked at him. The number was real. She knew what $210,000 meant for someone who had been sleeping in a parking lot 2 weeks ago. She knew exactly what it meant. She'd thought about it for 3 seconds when he said it, and in those 3 seconds she'd understood precisely why Walter had signed the document and taken the check all those years ago. Because it had probably felt approximately like this. What happened to Thomas Greer? She said. He didn't blink. Thomas Greer left Fern Crossing in 1997. He left his coat. Men leave things when they're in a hurry. His suitcase too. His recorder. A cassette tape he'd labeled specifically so whoever found it would know to play it. Caldwell looked at her for a moment. $210,000, he said again. The offer is open for 72 hours. He turned toward the door. Stopped. Miss Callahan, you came here with nothing. I'm not saying that as a judgment. I'm saying it because I think you're a practical woman and I'd like you to act like one. Don't leave here with less than you came with. He walked back across the parking lot, got into the blue sedan, pulled out onto the highway and was gone around the curve inside of 30 seconds. Nora stood at the window and watched the point where the car had been. She stood there for a long time. Then she sat down at the desk. She reached into the metal box. She took out the last envelope, the one with her name on it, the one she'd been carrying for 4 days without opening. She opened it. The handwriting was the shakiest she'd seen in any of the letters. Walter at the very end, writing with a hand that no longer fully obeyed him. The letters large and careful the way writing gets when the writer is concentrating on the physical act of it. Nora, he wrote, if you're reading this, you found the room. Which means you're who I thought you were. Which means I owe you an explanation and an apology, and I can only give you one of them properly. He explained why he'd chosen her. Not Diane, not because Diane wasn't capable, but because capability wasn't the quality this required. He'd visited Nora at Maplewood 3 years before her job ended, had watched her work for an afternoon, had watched her sit with a woman who was in the final weeks of her life, telling her the truth about her condition without softening it into something easier, but also without making it harder than it already was. Staying in the room through the ugly parts, not looking away. You never looked away, Walter wrote. I watched you and I thought, that's the one. If there's ever a reason to leave something hard behind for someone to carry, that's the one. I won't ask you to forgive me. Some things shouldn't be made smaller, just because the person who did them is sorry. I spent 24 years being sorry. Sorry doesn't give the Fenn family back their land. Sorry doesn't give Thomas Greer back his name. All I can give you is what I couldn't give anyone else. The room, the key, the letters. Be braver than I was. And below that, smaller, written last, I wasn't brave at all. She sat with the letter for a long time. Rex came out from under the desk and rested his chin on her knee. She put her hand on his head. Outside the window, the afternoon had gone flat and gray. The light changing the way it does when clouds are moving in from the north. She could hear the highway, a truck going south, then quiet. She thought about the number Caldwell had offered. She thought about Walter signing the document, taking the check, standing in room 9, listening to Thomas Greer's voice coming out of a cassette player. She thought about the 3 drafts of a letter to the police that he'd written and thrown away. She thought about driving past Raymond Holt's building twice a week on the way to the hardware store. She understood it. She understood all of it. The seduction of the practical decision. The way fear dressed itself up as reasonableness. The way 24 years could pass while you were waiting for a better moment to be brave. She folded the letter and put it in her jacket pocket. Then she picked up her phone and called Gus Vallow. He answered on the second ring. Television in the background, and then the sound of it being turned down. "I need to know," she said. "If I bring you everything, the letters, the tape, the documents from room 9, can you get it to someone who can actually do something with it?" Silence on the line. "I've been waiting 27 years for someone to ask me exactly that," Gus said. "Yes, I know a reporter at the Spokane paper. Former colleague. She's good at this kind of work. And the legal side. The fabricated notices. The land fraud. I know an attorney in Spokane who handles county corruption cases. She's been looking for a way into Caldwell's operation for 3 years, and hasn't had enough to move on." Nora looked at the stack of letters. "If this goes forward," she said, "Walter's name is in those documents, I know. It gets printed. Yes, you understand what I'm saying. He's not Caldwell, but he signed the document. He took the money, he sealed the room. I understand." A pause. "He still chose. Yes, is that going to stop you?" She looked at the 22 letters stacked on the desk. 24 years of correspondence with a man who wasn't there to read it, addressed to someone Walter believed was dead, because keeping the correspondence was the only honest thing left to do with the weight of what he knew. "No," she said. She hung up. She sat at the desk for a moment. Then she walked to the west wing. She stood outside room 9. She opened the door. She stood in the room and looked at the coat on the hook, the suitcase under the chair, the registration card in its clear sleeve on the desk corner, the lamp she'd run an extension cord from the hallway outlet 2 days ago, because she couldn't stand the room being in the dark. It gave the space a soft, warm light that made it look less like a crime scene, and more like a room that had been waiting, which was what it was. She turned off the lamp, then she turned it back on. She left it on and went back to the office. Diane called that night. She was still in Bellingham, but she'd been thinking, she said. She'd been thinking since she left Cedar Ridge that afternoon. "I read the letter again," Diane said. "The one from 1999. About the hardware store. I know the one. Walter drove past that building twice a week." "Yes, for 25 years. "Yes." Diane was quiet for a moment. "He must have been so tired," she said. It was not the thing Nora had expected her to say. She sat with it. "Yes," she said. "I think he was." Another pause. "Then what do you need from me?" "Nothing yet. But I'll know soon." "Okay." A beat. "Nora. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. I'm still figuring out what the right thing is." "I know. I still think you're doing it." She hung up. Nora looked at the desk, at the letters and the tape and Walter's last envelope with its shaky handwriting. At the 17th key in the small dish she'd put beside the lamp because she kept reaching for it and it was easier to have it visible. She picked it up, held it, then put it down and went to find something to eat because she'd forgotten to eat since breakfast, and that was the kind of thing that needed correcting. Raymond Holt came the morning after Gus had made his calls. She heard a truck before she saw it old pickup, the engine carrying a rattle that suggested maintenance by stubbornness rather than schedule. It parked. The engine went off. Nothing happened for a moment. Then the door opened and a man got out. 72 years old, she'd looked him up after finding his name in Walter's 1999 letter. Average height, going thin in the way men go thin in their 70s when they were never large to begin with. Gray jacket, work pants. He carried a cardboard box with both hands, the kind of posture that came from the box being heavier than it looked. He walked to the office door, knocked. She opened it. He looked at her. He had the look of a man who had rehearsed something and then, standing at the door, forgotten the rehearsed version, and was now working without a script. "I read what Gus Vallow posted online last night," he said. "He said you'd opened the room, that you'd found the tape." "Yes." He nodded slowly. He looked past her at the desk, at the letters, the tape, the open metal box. Then he held out the cardboard box. "These should be with what you found," he said. She took it. Inside were documents. Original copies. County letterhead. The legitimate assessor's reports, the real valuations for the 7 properties alongside fabricated notices he'd generated using the same letterhead, the same formatting, the same official language that had convinced 7 families their land was at risk. He'd kept both versions. For 27 years. She looked up at him. "Why did you keep them?" she said. He looked past her again. At something she couldn't see. Because I needed to know it had happened, he said. That it was real. That I had actually done it. He stopped. I kept telling myself I was holding on to them so someday I would do something. And then I didn't. And another year would pass. And I'd think, next year, when things are different, when I'm less afraid. But you kept them. I kept them. He looked at the box in her hands. I also called the county investigator's office this morning. Before I came here, I gave a preliminary statement. She hadn't expected that. They'll want to talk to you, he said, and to Vallow, and to the reporter he's contacted. He looked at her steadily. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not asking you to say it's all right, or that it didn't matter. It mattered. I know it mattered. He glanced at the motel, the rows of doors, the walkway. I just wanted to give you those, and to see the motel. I've driven past it for 27 years. What does it look like? She said. From out there, he was quiet for a moment. Like something that was holding its breath, he said. He got back in his truck. She watched it turn onto the highway and disappear south. She stood in the office doorway, with the box against her hip and Rex at her ankle, and she thought about what it took to carry something for 27 years, and then put it down. The specific exhaustion of it, the specific relief. She thought about Walter's letters, about the 24 years of correspondence addressed to a man he thought was dead. She went inside. She set Holt's box next to Walter's metal box on the desk. She opened her notebook to a fresh page. Wrote Raymond Holt at the top. Wrote, original documents confirmed. County investigator notified. Voluntary disclosure. Then she sat back and looked at what she'd written. The room was quiet. Rex had gone back under the desk. Outside the window, the morning was doing what mornings did in November in eastern Washington, becoming itself slowly, the light taking its time. She reached across the desk. She picked up the 17th key. She held it for a moment, the worn shaft, the plain head, the weight of it that was exactly the same as any key, but felt different because of what it had opened. Then she got up and walked down to room 9. She went inside. She stood in the middle of the room with the lamp burning warm against the November gray, coming in around the edges of the ivy-covered window. She looked at the coat, the suitcase, the registration card. She looked at Thomas Greer's name on the card, the blank checkout line. 27 years of blank. She stayed in the room for a while. Then she went back to the office to wait for whatever came next. The article ran on a Thursday. Gus had sent the materials to Carla Birch at the Spokane paper on a Monday. Carla had called Nora twice for verification, both times at odd hours, which Nora took as a sign that she was working the story rather than managing it. She asked precise questions. She didn't editorialize. She read back quotes before using them. She was the kind of reporter who understood that the story wasn't hers. She was just the person making sure it got told accurately. The headline read, Sealed Motel Room Unlocks 27-Year Land Fraud Case in Fern Crossing. Thomas Greer's name was in the second paragraph. Walter Callahan's name was in the 5th. Harris Caldwell's name was in the 8th. Raymond Holt's name was in the 9th. Nora read it at the office desk at 6 in the morning with the first coffee of the day, and Rex under the desk, and the November dark still pressed against the windows. She read it once straight through. Then she went back to the 5th paragraph and read it again. Walter Callahan, owner of Cedar Ridge Motel, signed documents and received payment in connection with the scheme, according to letters discovered among his personal effects. She sat with that sentence for a while. She'd known it was coming. She'd made the decision. She'd handed Gus the letters and the tape and the documents, and she'd told him, don't protect him. She'd meant it when she said it, and she still meant it now. Sitting in the early November dark with the article on the screen of her phone. But meaning something and feeling nothing about it were different things. She folded her phone face down on the desk. She made a second cup of coffee. She looked at the keyboard, at the 17th key on its hook. Then she picked up the phone and called Diane. It rang, she said when Diane answered. A pause. She could hear Diane sitting up. It was early. I'll read it now. 5th paragraph. I know where to look. Another pause longer. Reading. Okay. Yes, I see it. Walter's name. Yes. Diane was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of someone processing something they'd been preparing for, but that still landed differently than expected when it arrived. He should have done it himself, Diane said finally. Yes, but he didn't know. And you did it for him. I did it because it needed doing. Another pause. Then that's the same thing, Nora. With Walter, that's the same thing. She didn't answer that. She wasn't sure she disagreed. Call me when you know more, Diane said, and hung up. Patricia Solis called at 9. County investigator. Mid-50s. She'd said when she'd introduced herself by phone the previous week after Raymond Holt's voluntary disclosure. She'd come in person the day after. Small woman. Efficient posture. Yellow legal pad. Backup pen produced from her jacket pocket without breaking a sentence when the first one ran dry. I've read the article, Solis said. So has everyone, apparently. Mr. Caldwell's attorney contacted our office this morning. Nora went still. Already. Which tells you something. That he read the article this morning too. That his attorney was ready for the article before it ran. A pause. He knew it was coming, Miss Callahan. The question was always timing. And now the timing is settled. What does that mean for the investigation? It means we move faster than we planned to. She heard the sound of paper. I need you to come in this week. Bring whatever original documents you still have on hand. The letters. Holt's box. Everything. When? Tomorrow if you can. I can. One more thing. A pause. The article mentions Thomas Greer extensively. It raises the question of what happened to him. Our office has been running a parallel inquiry on that since Holt gave his statement. Another pause, longer. I'd like to discuss that with you in person. Nora looked at the lamp burning in room 9 through the office window, the soft light around the edges of the ivy-covered glass. I'll be there at 9, she said. Betty Fenn came that same afternoon. Nora hadn't reached out to her. Betty Fenn was 75 and had a sister who had a friend in the assessor's office and news in Fern Crossing, moved through networks that had nothing to do with newspapers and everything to do with who called whom on Thursday evenings after supper. She drove a Buick that was at least 15 years old and kept in the condition of something that had been cared for consistently and without drama. She parked it with the alignment of a woman who had been parking in the same kinds of spaces for decades and knew exactly how much room she needed. She was small, white hair cut close, eyes that had been crying recently, not now, but recently, and she'd done nothing to hide the evidence of it, which told Nora something about her. She sat across the desk and put her hands flat on the surface in front of her and said, "My father sold 80 acres. I know," Nora said. "I read his name in the documents. He sold it because the county sent a letter, official looking, said the land was being considered for her utility corridor. He didn't want to fight the government. He was 64. My mother had just been diagnosed with something that was going to cost money and take time, and he didn't need one more complicated thing." She looked at her hands. He sold at $4,200 an acre. Land adjacent to his sold 18 months later for $11,000 an acre. I know. He died believing he had made the worst financial decision of his life. She looked up. He apologized to us for it. At the end, he apologized to my sister and me for the land. Nora didn't say anything. Your grandfather's name is in the article, Betty said. Yes. He allowed the meetings here. Yes. He signed documents and took money. He found out later what the scheme actually was. He spent the next 24 years writing letters to Thomas Greer that he never sent. Betty absorbed this. Why are you telling me the hard version? Because you drove here from wherever you live with your eyes red and your hands flat on the table. You deserve the hard version. Betty looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at the room. The letters in the metal box, the tape on the desk, the 17th key in its dish by the lamp. She took it all in slowly. Is there anything that can be done, she said. Legally? For the families? The county investigator thinks there may be a civil avenue. I can give you her number, I'd like that. Nora wrote it on a notepad, tore off the sheet, slid it across. Betty took it, folded it, put it in her coat pocket. Then she looked at Nora. You didn't have to do this, she said. Walter did. He couldn't. Betty was quiet. Close isn't gone, she said finally. She was looking through the window at the motel. I used to drive past this place and think it was nearly done. That it was one bad winter away from coming down. It might still be. Close isn't gone, Betty said again. Close is still fixable. She left. Rex watched her car back out of the lot and onto the highway. Then he looked at Nora. I know, Nora said. She met with Patricia Solis the next morning. Solis had an office in a county building 20 miles east of Fern Crossing. Small office, practical furniture, a window that looked at a parking structure. She had the yellow legal pad and a new pen, and she went through the documents Nora brought with the methodical focus of someone who has done this long enough to know which details will matter later. They worked for 2 hours. At the end of it, Solis capped her pen and looked at Nora. The chain of documentation here is unusually complete, she said. The letters establish knowledge and participation. Holt's originals establish the mechanism. The tape establishes that Greer had identified the key actors before he disappeared. Together, it's a strong foundation. What about Caldwell? His attorney is negotiating terms of cooperation. He's not a young man. He has health considerations. His attorney is framing this as a matter of making things right while he still can, which is, she almost smiled, a creative characterization of a man avoiding indictment. And the families? Betty Fenn has already called me. 3 of the other original families have been located. The inquiry gives them standing for civil claims. It won't restore what they lost, but it establishes the record. It establishes that they were defrauded. Nora looked at the window, at the parking structure. Thomas Greer, she said. Solis folded her hands on the desk. What I'm about to tell you isn't public yet, she said. It will be. But not yet. Nora waited. Thomas Greer did not disappear voluntarily in 1997. Solis said it evenly, the way she said everything. He was pressured to leave the state. He received a communication that made his situation and the consequences of staying clear enough that he understood he needed to go. He went to Portland. He used a different name professionally. He has been living in Bend, Oregon for the past 19 years. The office was very quiet. He's alive, Nora said. He is. 61 years old. He read the article the morning it ran. She thought about the coat on the hook, the suitcase under the chair, the receipt for 2 coffees and a slice of pie dated March 6, 1997. 2 days after he checked in. 2 days of asking questions in Fern Crossing before he understood he needed to stop asking and start moving. His sister, Nora said. Carol, does she know? She knows. She was notified yesterday. Solis looked at her. He called her himself, Sunday morning before we'd made contact. He read the article and called her before anything else. How long has it been since they spoke? 27 years. Nora sat with that. 27 years. And the first thing Thomas Greer did when he found out it was safe, when the article ran and the record existed somewhere public that couldn't be sealed again, was call his sister. She started. Stopped. He's processing, Solis said. That's what his sister told us. He said he needed a few days. Nora nodded. She looked at the window again. Tell me, Solis said, what you plan to do with room 9. I'm going to leave it. As it is? The coat, the suitcase, the registration card, the key on the desk. She paused. Not as a tourist attraction. Not as something strange. Just as a room where someone stayed and mattered and wasn't forgotten. So looked at her for a moment. Okay, she said, which was, Nora thought, exactly the right response. Carol Greer called 3 days later. She had a voice that had learned to be careful with itself, measured, not cold. The precision of someone who had explained painful things to too many people and had learned to protect herself by being exact rather than emotional. She was calling from Tacoma. She'd read the article. She'd spoken to Solis. He called me Sunday morning, she said. I almost didn't answer. I didn't recognize the number. But you answered, I answered. A pause. He sounds older, obviously, but also himself. He sounds like Thomas. Another pause, the kind that needed to exist. I wasn't sure he still would. When did you last? March 1997. He called me from Cedar Ridge. Twice. She stopped. He said it was quiet there, that the man who ran it made good coffee. Walter, behind the front desk, with the leftward-leaning handwriting, and the coffee pot that probably ran all day. He did, Nora said. Make good coffee. I'd like to come, Carol said, to see the room. If that would be all right. The room will be here, Nora said. Come whenever you're ready. She came the following Wednesday. Silver sedan, Tacoma plates. She parked beside Nora's Honda and got out and stood in the lot for a moment, just looking at Cedar Ridge. She was 70 years old. Silver hair pinned up loosely. Small, the way some women are small in a way that has nothing to do with the amount of space they take up. She had the stillness of someone who has been carrying something for so long that the carrying has become part of her posture. Nora met her in the lot. They shook hands. It felt both formal and correct. "Thank you for coming," Nora said. Carol looked at the motel, the rows of doors, the walkway. "He talked about this place," she said. "When he was here in '97, he called me twice from the room, said it was quiet, that he could think here." Nora thought about room 9, the narrow bed, the desk, the small window covered with ivy. It was a good room for thinking. It was isolated enough for that. "Which room?" Carol said. "This way." She walked Carol to the west wing. She unlocked the door. She'd been keeping it locked since the beginning. Some instinct she hadn't examined closely, and pushed it open and stepped back. Carol went in alone. Nora stood in the doorway. She watched Carol stand in the center of the room, not moving, taking it in the way you take in something you've been imagining for a long time and need to verify against the real thing. The bed, the chair, the desk, the nightstand, the lamp burning warm in the November gray. Then Carol walked to the coat hook. She put her hand on the sleeve of the brown wool coat. She stood there, her hand on the sleeve, her back to Nora, the room quiet around her. "He wore this every winter," she said. Her voice was steady, the steadiness of someone maintaining something that required maintenance. "I know," Nora said. She didn't know, but she knew the shape of what needed to be said. Carol looked at the registration card in its clear sleeve on the desk corner. Thomas Greer, March 4, 1997. The blank checkout line. "My mother waited by the phone for 3 years," Carol said, still with her back to Nora. She said, "He'll call. He needs time, but he'll call." She waited. She moved his things around, but she never put them away. Not once in 3 years. She turned the registration card over in its sleeve carefully. She died in 2008, not knowing whether he'd left willingly or not. Nora couldn't say anything adequate to that. There was nothing adequate. She knew that from 12 years of sitting with people at the end of things. "I'm sorry," she said anyway. Carol shook her head slightly. "You didn't do this." She looked at the room one more time. The coat, the suitcase, the lamp. "But you kept it." "I almost didn't," Nora said. "There was a period of about 4 days where I nearly—" "But you didn't." "No." Carol turned and looked at her. "He has a room," she said. "He always did." "No." Carol looked at the room again, at all of it. "I mean, he has a place in the world again." Someone kept the light on. Nora felt something move in her chest. Not break, not the dramatic collapse of something. More like a window that had been stuck finally coming free. The brief resistance, and then the opening, and then the different air. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She called her mother that evening. Ruth Callahan was 67, and lived in Tacoma and had not spoken to Walter for 3 years before he died. The estrangement had been mutual and quiet, and had never been fully explained to Nora or Diane. Had existed at the edges of family occasions like an unaddressed piece of furniture everyone stepped around. Nora had asked once, years ago. Her mother had said, "We disagreed about something." Nora had known that wasn't the complete answer. She hadn't asked again. Now she sat on the walkway outside the office in the November cold, with her jacket zipped to the throat and her mother's number on the screen. She pressed call. Ruth answered on the 3rd ring. Nora. The careful voice. The one she used when something had already caught her attention and she was deciding how much of that to let show. "Hi, Mom. I read the article. I know. I should have called before it ran." "Yes." A pause. Not punitive. Just true. "His name is in the 5th paragraph." "I know. He signed documents. He took money." "Yes, and then he sealed the room and wrote letters for 24 years to a man he thought was dead." Nora looked at the office window. At the lamp still burning in room 9 visible from here, the soft light around the edges of the ivy glass. "Yes," she said. "That's—" Her mother stopped. Started again. "That's a very strange way to live. It's the way he found that let him keep going. He couldn't destroy the evidence. He couldn't hand it over. He couldn't throw away the letters. So he kept writing them. Because keeping the correspondence was the only honest thing left. Her mother was quiet for a long time. He never told me, she said. I know. When we stopped speaking, the reason we stopped speaking was because I could feel he was carrying something, and he wouldn't tell me what it was. He kept saying it was the motel. Just the motel, just the work of keeping it running. And I kept thinking, that's not all of it. There's something else. Her voice had changed, something in it had loosened. I was right, and I couldn't make him tell me. And eventually I stopped trying. 3 years before he died, 3 years, a pause. I thought we had more time to work it out. Nora thought about the 2019 letter. Walter's handwriting already larger, already requiring more concentration. Writing to Thomas about leaving the motel to Nora. About needing someone who didn't look away. Mom, she said. Walter's last letter, the one he left for me. Can I read you part of it? Yes. She unfolded it from her jacket pocket, found the passage. He wrote, I won't ask you to forgive me. Some things shouldn't be made smaller just because the person who did them is sorry. I spent 24 years being sorry. Sorry doesn't fix the Fenn family. Sorry doesn't give Thomas Greer back what he lost. She paused. And then he wrote, I wasn't brave at all. The line was very quiet. When her mother spoke again, her voice was different. He knew, she said softly. He knew exactly what he'd done. He never made himself innocent in any of the letters. He just couldn't do the thing that would have made it right. He was afraid. Yes, he was always afraid of things that didn't look like the kind of things that scared people, her mother said. He could fix anything. A pipe, a roof, an engine, but certain other things. She stopped. I didn't understand that about him until very late. I think that's what the letters were, Nora said. Him trying to understand it about himself. They stayed on the phone for a while after that. Not saying much. Sometimes talking and sometimes not. It was the longest phone call Nora could remember having with her mother in years. When they finally hung up, Nora sat on the walkway for another few minutes in the cold. Then she went inside and stood in room 9 for a while with the lamp burning. Just stood there. Then she went to bed. Diane came down the following Saturday. She arrived at 7 in the morning in her own car, this time not a rental, her actual car. The one with the Portland parking permit on the windshield and the reusable grocery bags in the back and the backup charger in the console, which meant she'd made the drive deliberately, not as a side trip. She brought 2 coffees from the diner on the main street of Fern Crossing, which meant she'd stopped before coming to the motel, which meant she'd been thinking about what she wanted to say during the drive and had decided to give herself 10 additional minutes to finalize it. She handed Nora a coffee without ceremony. The roof, she said. Room 3. Show me. Nora showed her. They stood under the section above room 3, and Diane looked at it with the specific focus she brought to anything that could be quantified. She reached up and pressed at the edge of the damaged area, looked at the extent of it. The contractor's estimate was fair, she said. That's what I thought. What about 4? Pipe under the sink. Local plumber said 300. Room 2 window? Hardware store has the replacement part. I can do it. Diane looked at her. You know how to replace a window? I know how to read instructions and have enough patience to follow them. Diane almost smiled. All right. She turned back to the motel, both rows, the walkway, the sign. She looked at it the way she'd looked at it when she first arrived, that efficient scanner sweep, except the calculation behind it now was different. It's not as bad as I thought it was, she said. It was never as bad as it looked. That's either wisdom or wishful thinking. Possibly both. They drank their coffees in the parking lot. Rex sat between them looking at the highway. The Saturday morning was cold and still, and the sky was the pale uniform gray of a day that intended to stay that way. Patricia Solis called me, Diane said. I know. She mentioned she would. She asked about Walter's estate records. Whether there was other documentation. I'd seen financial records from the motel, that era. I told her the same thing. I gave her what I had. She looked at her coffee. It wasn't much. Walter kept the motel records himself. Always himself, he would have. Yes. A pause. He should have told us, Nora. Yes. He should have told Mom. He should have told someone who could have. Yes. Instead, he wrote letters to a dead man for 24 years. He wasn't dead. Diane looked at her. Thomas Greer, Nora said. He wasn't dead. He was in Oregon. He's 61 years old, and he read the article the morning it ran and called his sister. Diane was very still. He's alive. He's alive. She watched her sister absorb this. The way Diane absorbed things internally. The scanner processing. No visible drama. Just the stillness of recalibration. Does Carol know? He called her himself. Diane looked at the highway, then back at the motel, at room 9's door. Walter thought he was dead, she said. For 27 years. Yes. He wrote 22 letters to a man he thought was dead. Yes. Diane was quiet for a long moment. She stopped. Started again. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Yes, Nora said, it is. They stood in the parking lot until the coffees were gone. Then Diane put on her work gloves and went to look at the roof section. Because that was how Diane handled sadness. She turned toward the thing that could be fixed and fixed it. Nora went inside to call the contractor. Thomas Greer arrived on a Tuesday. It was the 3rd week of November. The trees on the East Ridge were bare. The morning had the particular cold clarity of late autumn in the mountains, the kind of air that felt like something had been removed from it. Rex started doing it the day before, going to the parking lot, sitting at the edge of the asphalt near the highway, looking south. He'd done it 3 times Monday, each time walking out with purpose and sitting for 5 or 10 minutes, and then coming back inside. Tuesday morning, he did it at 8, then again at 10. At 11:15, a car turned off the highway. Old Subaru. Dark green, the paint oxidized on the roof. Oregon plates. It pulled into the lot and stopped. The engine went off. Nothing happened for a moment. Rex left Nora's side and walked out. The driver's door opened. A man got out. 61 years old. Average height. Gray at the temples that had once been brown, she could tell from the photograph Carol had left on the desk in room 9. The one from 1996. He was wearing a jacket, not a coat. He'd been driving for a while. He moved with the stiffness of someone who had been sitting too long, and was negotiating with his own legs about it. He stood beside the car. He looked at Cedar Ridge, at the rows of doors, the walkway, the sign that was straight now and had all its letters. At room 9's door, second from the end of the west wing. He didn't move toward the office. He just stood and looked. Rex walked across the parking lot, across the cracked asphalt in the November cold. He walked up to the man and sat down in front of him and looked up. Thomas Greer looked down at the dog. He crouched, put both hands on either side of Rex's face. Rex leaned into his left hand. Thomas closed his eyes. He stayed like that, crouched in the parking lot of Cedar Ridge Motel, with both hands on the dog's face, his eyes closed in the cold Tuesday morning. Nora stood at the office window with her hand flat against the glass. She did not go outside, not yet, because some moments belonged to the person inside them, and the best thing anyone else could do was leave the person alone in it. She'd learned that in 12 years of care work, the presence of a witness changed what a moment was. Sometimes you had to stay in the doorway. She waited. After 3 minutes, maybe 4, Thomas Greer stood up. He looked at the motel again. Then he looked at the office window. He saw her. She walked to the door and opened it. They stood 15 feet apart in the parking lot. Rex sat between them, looking from one to the other. Miss Callahan, Thomas said. Mr. Greer. He looked at the motel. I drove past twice, he said, on the highway. Before I turned in, I know I saw. He looked at her. You saw. The office window faces the highway. He absorbed that. Then he looked at room 9's door. Can I? Yes. She walked him there. She unlocked the door. She pushed it open. She stepped back. He went in. She didn't follow. She sat on the walkway outside with Rex beside her. The November morning was cold and still. The bare branches of the trees on the ridge made precise lines against the pale sky. She heard him moving inside. The slow movement of someone going through a small space, with intention. A drawer opening. The sound of something being set down carefully. Then nothing for a long time. She sat on the walkway and looked at the parking lot. His green Subaru with the Oregon plates. Her Honda with the cracked rear bumper that she kept meaning to get looked at. The 2 cars side by side. She thought about Walter. Not the Walter of the letters, though she knew him now in ways she hadn't before. Knew the shape of his fear, and the texture of his regret, the 24 years of correspondence, that was its own kind of penance. She thought about the Walter she'd actually known. The one who made birthday cards with precise leftward handwriting and tucked $20 bills inside. Who made coffee strong enough to have opinions. Who taught her, entirely by accident, what it looked like to carry something heavy for so long it became part of your posture. She didn't need to flatten him into something simple. She'd never needed to do that with anyone, not in 12 years of sitting with people at the end of things, where the complicated versions of people were the only ones left, and you learned to hold the whole of someone without needing them to be easier than they were. Walter had been afraid, and kind, and complicit, and sorry for 24 years in a way that never quite found its outlet. All of that was true. All of it was him. She could love the version that gave her $20 in birthday cards. She could tell the truth about the version that signed documents and sealed a room. Both things, at the same time, without one canceling the other. Thomas came out after 20 minutes. He stood in the doorway and looked at the room behind him, then turned and looked at the parking lot. Carol left a photograph, he said, on the desk. She wanted you to have it there. He nodded. He leaned against the doorframe and looked at the walkway. Your grandfather, he said. The letters? You don't have to. No, I want to. He looked at the parking lot, at his car. 22 letters, from 1997 to 2021. He kept the room. He couldn't destroy it. He wrote about it, in the 1997 letter. He said if he cleared it out, he'd be the last person alive who knew it had happened. He couldn't be that. Thomas was quiet for a moment. He believed I was dead, he said. For 27 years. Yes. He wrote letters to a dead man, yes. Why? She thought about this, about the specific answer rather than the easy one. I think because stopping would have meant it was over, she said. And it wasn't over. He knew it wasn't over. Writing kept it real. It kept you real. It was the only way he knew to stay honest about what he'd done. Thomas looked at her steadily. He left you the place, he said. He did. Why you? He said I was the only one who didn't look away from hard things. She paused. He'd watched me work once, at the care facility where I used to be employed. He said I never looked away even when the room was hard. Thomas looked at her for a long moment. He was right, he said. He was sometimes right, she said. About some things. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, but close. They stood on the walkway in the cold for a while. Then Rex stood up and moved toward the office door, which was his way of indicating that the temperature was making his joints unhappy, and he thought they should all go inside. So they did. The weeks after that moved differently than the weeks before. Not faster, just differently, with more people in them, more cars in the lot, more voices. Betty Fenn came back with a friend who had an electrician's license, and on a Saturday morning they sorted out the wiring in room 9, so the lamp had a proper outlet instead of an extension cord running under the door from the hallway. The lamp burned steadily after that. No flicker. Gus Vallow came over most mornings. He sat in the office chair across the desk and drank his own coffee and read the developments in the case on his phone and reported them to Nora, with the particular satisfaction of a man who had waited a very long time to see a story reach its proper ending. Patricia Solis called on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the article ran. Harris Caldwell's attorney has confirmed full cooperation with the investigation, she said, in exchange for a negotiated resolution. The details are still being finalized, but the county has formally opened the inquiry into the 1997 land transactions. And the families. Betty Fenn's family has retained a civil attorney. The formal inquiry gives them standing to bring a claim. 3 other families have been located and contacted. A pause. It won't give them what they lost. The land is gone. The years are gone. But the record exists now. The official record. It gives them their name back, Nora said. Their father's name. The version where he wasn't someone who made a terrible decision. He was someone who was deceived. Yes, Solis said. It gives them that. Another pause. Raymond Holt asked me to tell you something, Solis said. What? He said. I hope the motel stays open. Nora looked at the keyboard, at the 16 numbered keys and the 17th without a number. Tell him it will, she said. Diane called that evening. I closed the file with Dennis Marsh, she said. Nora went still. The Cedar Ridge inquiry. I told him the property isn't available. A pause. I should have done it sooner, Diane. Don't brief. I'm not looking for a conversation about it. I just wanted you to know. Okay. What does the roof above room 3 cost? $2,200. I'll cover half. You don't have to. I know, I don't have to. That's not why I'm doing it. A pause. Send me the contractor's invoice, and tell me what else needs doing. Room 4, pipe. Room 2, window. Numbers. $300 for the plumber. Hardware store has the window kit, it's $90. Fine. She heard Diane writing something down. Nora. Yes. A pause. The kind Diane rarely left. It's a good thing you did. With the room. With the letters. Another pause. I want you to know I think that. Then she hung up. Because Diane had never been comfortable staying on the line after she'd said the important thing. It was one of the most consistent things about her. Nora set the phone down. She looked at the office. At the metal box with Walter's letters. At the tape on the corner of the desk. At the 17th key in the dish. She picked up the key. She walked to room 9. She went inside. The room looked the same as it had the day she'd first opened it. The coat on the hook. The suitcase under the chair. The registration card in its sleeve. The lamp burning warm. Carol's photograph of Thomas on the desk, him in 1996. Young and smiling. Standing in front of something she couldn't make out in the background. Alive and himself, and not yet knowing what March 1997 would bring. She set the 17th key on the desk. Next to the registration card. Next to the photograph. She looked at the room one more time. Then she went out. She did not lock the door behind her. Carol came back the following week. She didn't come alone this time. She brought Thomas. They parked their cars side by side, her silver sedan, his green Subaru, and walked across the lot together. Not touching. Just walking at the same pace, the way people walk when they've spent enough time near each other that their bodies remember the rhythm. Nora met them in the lot. She didn't say anything. She just walked them to room 9. Carol went in first. Thomas stood in the doorway for a moment before following her. Nora stayed outside. She sat on the walkway with Rex. The December air was sharp. Her breath showed. She could hear them inside, not words. Just the sound of 2 people in a small room together. The specific acoustics of presence. After a while the sounds went quiet. Then Carol came to the doorway. "Thank you," she said. "There's nothing to thank me for." "There is." She looked at Nora steadily. Thomas stopped. He said the room is exactly how he left it. He said he didn't think anyone would keep it. Walter kept it. You kept Walter. Nora didn't answer that. Carol looked at the parking lot. At the motel. At the sign with all its letters. "He doesn't know yet what he wants to do," she said. "Thomas. He has a life in Bend, work he's built. People who know him by a name that isn't his. He needs time to figure out how much of it to bring back." "The room will be here," Nora said. "However long he needs." Carol nodded. She went back inside. Nora sat on the walkway with Rex in the December cold and looked at the parking lot and thought about time. About what 27 years meant from inside it. About the specific texture of returning to a place you'd left in a hurry in the dark. About what it meant to have a room kept for you. The last evening of November, Nora stood outside Cedar Ridge as the last light went behind the western ridge. 2 rooms had guests. A woman driving north to visit family. A retired couple who had stopped because the drive was long. 3 legitimate reasons to stop at a motel. 3 people who just needed a clean room and a working shower and somewhere to leave their shoes. She understood that need without qualification. The sign was straight. The letterboard read Cedar Ridge Motel. All letters present. Diane had hired someone after Nora's own attempts produced only a sign that was straight in some places. Rex was on the walkway. Gus Vallow was visible through the diner window at the end of the main street. He'd started leaving a hand in the window when he saw her car in the lot. She'd started waving back. It had become the shape of something. Diane was coming for Christmas. She'd called on Tuesday to say so without making it a question. Their mother had called Wednesday. They'd talked for 40 minutes. A record. Thomas had called once briefly to say he'd spoken to the Investigator's office about his statement, and that the process was moving, and that he thought he might come back in the spring, when it was warmer, when he'd had more time. She'd said the room would be here. She meant it. She looked at Cedar Ridge, at the rows of doors, the walkway, at room 9's door second from the end of the west wing, the soft light visible around the frame. She'd been asked 3 weeks ago by Patricia Solis, "What do you plan to do with the room?" She'd said, "Leave it as it is. The coat, the suitcase, the card, the key on the desk, not as a memorial, not as something strange, as a room where someone stayed and mattered and wasn't forgotten." She walked to the office. She turned off the desk lamp. She turned off the walkway lights. She turned off everything that needed turning off. She left the lamp in room 9 burning. She stood in the parking lot for a moment in the dark. The sign glowed faintly from the road lights. The 2 guest rooms had their lights on. And room 9 had its lamp, the soft, warm light around the edges of the ivy-covered window, visible from the lot, visible from the highway, if you were looking. Rex came and stood beside her. She put her hand on his back. Then she walked to room 14 and went inside and closed the door. Behind her, the motel settled into the November night. The sign held its letters. The guest rooms held their guests. The walkway held its quiet. And in room 9, the lamp burned on the nightstand beside the 17th key, and the registration card with its blank checkout line, and the photograph of a man smiling in 1996 who had spent 27 years waiting for someone to keep the light on. Someone had, and the light stayed on. December came to Fern Crossing quietly and all at once. One morning the ground was hard. The next morning it was white. Not a storm, just snow, arriving the way it did in this part of Washington, without announcement, settling onto the rooftops and the parking lot and the bare branches of the trees on the East Ridge, as if it had always been the plan and was simply executing on schedule. Nora stood in the Cedar Ridge lot at 6 in the morning and looked at it. She'd been awake since 4, not from anxiety. Something closer to alertness, the wakefulness that comes when you're inside something, and your brain has decided that sleep is less important than understanding what that something is. She'd made coffee. She'd sat at the desk. She'd read 2 of Walter's letters again, not searching for anything new, just living with them the way you live with something you've decided is worth understanding completely. Rex had been under the desk until she got up. Then he was simply beside her. 9 years old, graying around the muzzle and above the eyes, moving with the careful gait of a dog whose back legs had opinions about cold mornings. He stood in the lot and looked at the snow with the same stillness he brought to most things. She looked at the parking lot, at the way snow made everything look simpler than it was. It covered the cracks in the asphalt, made the sign look clean, made Cedar Ridge look, from a certain angle, like a place that had always been exactly what it appeared to be. She knew better. But she also knew the cracks were still there under the snow, and the sign had all its letters, and the motel was standing, and sometimes that combination was enough. She went back inside and made a second pot of coffee. At 8 o'clock, Gus Vallow knocked. He was wearing a heavier jacket than usual and carrying a travel mug instead of his thermos, which meant he'd been to the diner before coming over. He came in, looked at the snow through the window, and said, "Roof above room 3 held up. I checked at 6. Good." He sat down. "Solis called me last night." "Me too." "Then you know about Caldwell." "I know what she told me." He looked at the window. Cooperative agreement finalized. Full documentation of the 1,997 transactions, Valley Horizon Partners. The payments, the fabricated notices, the chain of who knew what and when. Caldwell's attorney spent 6 weeks negotiating. He set the mug down. In exchange, no criminal indictment. His age, his health. The argument was that what the county needed was the record, not a trial. Nora had thought about this, not to decide whether it was right or wrong in the abstract, but to understand what it actually gave and what it didn't. It didn't give Betty Fenn's father back. It didn't give Carol 3 years of not waiting by the phone. It didn't give Thomas 27 years of a name that was his own. It gave the record, the official version. The one that existed in documents rather than only in memory and in letters sealed under a floorboard. Is that enough? She said. Gus looked at her. It's what happened. Whether it's enough is a different question. Is it enough for you? He thought about it. The unhurried kind of thinking he did not perform in consideration, but actually doing it. There are things that can't be made whole, he said, and things that can be made clear. Making them clear is not nothing, even when it's not everything. He picked up the mug. So yes, for me, it's enough. She nodded. The snow was still coming down. Small flakes, slow, the kind that accumulated without drama. Holt called me last week, Gus said. He's been driving past the motel, parking for a few minutes and then leaving. Hasn't come to the door. Nora looked at the window, at room 9's lamp visible in the winter gray. He'll come when he's ready, she said. That's what I told him. Gus wrapped both hands around the travel mug. He also said he's talking to a lawyer about the pension. He wants to redirect it to the families if it can be structured that way. She hadn't expected that. Raymond Holt, she said. Yes, the man who fabricated the notices. The same man. Gus looked at her. People are complicated enough to carry more than one thing. She thought about Walter's letters. About the Walter who gave stranded travelers free rooms, and the Walter who signed documents and took a check. Both real. Both him. Yes, she said. They are. Betty Fenn came that afternoon. Nora hadn't reached out to her. Betty was 75, and had a sister who had a friend in the assessor's office, and news in Fern Crossing, moved through channels that had nothing to do with newspapers, and everything to do with who called whom on Thursday evenings. She drove a Buick at least 15 years old, and in the condition of something cared for consistently and without drama. She parked it with the precision of a woman who had been parking in similar spaces for decades, and knew exactly how much room she needed. She was small, white hair cut close, eyes that had been crying recently, not now, but recently, and she'd done nothing to hide the evidence, which told Nora something about her. She sat across the desk and put her hands flat on the surface. My father sold 80 acres, she said. I know. His name is in the documents. He sold because the county sent a letter, official looking. Said the land was under consideration for a utility corridor. He didn't want to fight the government. He was 64. My mother had just been diagnosed with something that was going to cost money and take time, and he didn't need one more complicated thing. She looked at her hands. He sold at $4,200 an acre. Land adjacent to his sold 18 months later for $11,000 an acre. I know. He died believing he'd made the worst financial decision of his life. He apologized to my sister and me at the end. For the land. Nora didn't say anything. Your grandfather's name is in the article, Betty said. Yes. He signed documents and took money. He found out later what the scheme actually was. He spent the next 24 years writing letters to Thomas Greer that he never sent. Betty looked up. Why are you telling me the hard version? Because you drove here with your eyes red and your hands flat on the table. You deserve the hard version. Betty looked at the desk, at the letters in the metal box, at the 17th key in its dish beside the lamp. Is there anything that can be done, she said, legally, for the families? Patricia Solis thinks there may be a civil avenue. I can give you her number. I'd like that. Nora wrote it on a notepad, slid it across. Betty took it, folded it, put it in her coat pocket. Then she looked at Nora. You didn't have to do this, she said. Walter did. He couldn't. Betty was quiet for a moment. Close isn't gone, she said. She was looking through the window at the motel. I used to drive past this place and think it was one bad winter away from coming down. It might still be. Close isn't gone, Betty said again. Close is still fixable. She left. Rex watched her car back out of the lot. Then he looked at Nora. I know, she said. Raymond Holt came 3 days later. She heard his truck before she saw its old engine, the rattle of something maintained by determination rather than optimism. He parked, sat in the truck for a moment, then got out. 72 years old, gray jacket, work pants. He walked to the office door and knocked. She opened it. He looked at her the way a man looks when he had something rehearsed and is now working without it. I've been driving past, he said. I know. Gus told me. He nodded. He looked past her at the desk, at the letters, the tape, The open metal box. I called the county investigator's office this morning, he said. Again, about the pension. He looked at the parking lot. I don't want it. I've been thinking about how to redirect it. There's a process. It takes time, but I'm doing it. She looked at him. Come in, she said. He shook his head. I just wanted to say that. He looked at room 9's window, at the lamp, and to see it from out here, the light. She stepped to one side so he could see it properly. The warm glow around the ivy-covered glass. The way it sat against the December gray. He stood there for a moment. Then he got back in his truck and drove away. She stood in the office doorway and watched him go. She thought about what it took to carry something for 27 years and then put it down. Not all at once, piece by piece. First the documents. Then the statement. Now the pension. Each piece a separate decision. The days between Christmas and New Year were quiet at Cedar Ridge. 2 guests over those 8 days, a woman driving to see her sister, a man going north who had simply needed to stop. Neither stayed more than 1 night. Both left the rooms in good order and thanked her at checkout with the slightly surprised gratitude of people who had expected less. She found she liked that, the low-key usefulness of it. Someone needed a place to stop and she had one. Diane arrived on the 23rd with a casserole in a carrier bag and opinions about the window seal in room 2 that she had been developing remotely for 3 weeks. She came through the door, set the casserole in the kitchenette, looked around, and said, The lamp in room 9 is on. Yes. Is it always on? Yes. Diane looked at the window facing the west wing, at the warm light visible around the ivy-covered glass. She looked at it longer than Nora expected. Then, okay. She went to look at the room 2 window seal. They spent the afternoon fixing it together. Nora had done the replacement well enough. The frame was square. The glass sat right, but Diane had been correct from her remote assessment that the bottom left corner wasn't flush. They fixed it. 2 trips to the hardware store because the first weather stripping was the wrong width. On the second trip, the man behind the counter looked at Nora and said, You're the one from the motel. Yes. He nodded. My uncle sold land in 1997. 40 acres, south of the highway. He set the weather stripping on the counter. He thought he'd made a bad decision his whole life. Turns out he'd been tricked. He looked at her. Thank you for what you did. She didn't know what to say to that. She said the only true thing. I opened a door that was already there. He shook his head slightly. That was enough. Back at the motel, Diane held the weather stripping in place while Nora ran the seal. They worked the way they'd always worked, alongside each other without much narration, in a rhythm built from decades of sharing the same space. Dishes, laundry, the domestic logistics of a shared childhood. The language of it didn't require words. When they finished, Diane pressed the corner of the seal to check it. Better, she said. Yes. She set down the tool bag, looked at the motel, both rows, the walkway, the sign. I've been thinking about what to do with my half, she said. Nora waited. Walter left it to you. I know that. But the way it's worked out, you carry the whole thing and I send money for a roof section. She looked at Cedar Ridge with the focused attention she gave to anything that could be invested in or improved. Not cataloging for extraction this time. Something else. I want to put money in properly. Not a loan. As a contribution. As what I should have offered when I first pulled into this parking lot. It's not going to be profitable for a long time, Nora said. I know. It might not ever be profitable in the way you'd define profitable. I've revised my definitions. She said it simply. A minor administrative update. As if the revision had already been processed and filed, and she was simply reporting on it. Nora looked at the motel. Room 5 needs the bathroom fixtures replaced, she said. Room 7 needs new flooring. The office computer runs like it resents being asked to function. Make me a list, with numbers. Okay. And Nora. Diane turned to look at her directly. Stop sleeping in room 14. You've been sleeping in room 14 since you arrived. I can tell because the pillow in there has been on the same side of the bed every time I've looked through the window. The window faces the parking lot. The curtain doesn't close all the way on the left side. Diane picked up the tool bag. Room 14 is a guest room. You're not a guest. There's a back room off the office. Use it. She went back to the office. Nora stood in the parking lot. She looked at room 14's door, then at the office. She wasn't a guest. She'd been treating Cedar Ridge like a temporary situation, like the Safeway parking lot in Renton, something she was passing through on the way to something else. She'd kept one foot outside the door since October, in case she needed to move quickly. She didn't need to move quickly. She wasn't going anywhere. She went inside. She moved her duffel from room 14 to the back room off the office narrow bed, window facing the east ridge. She put her blazer on the hook on the back of the door. She put her thermos on the shelf above the window. She looked at the room. Rex came in and lay down in the corner with the settled ease of a dog claiming a space he considers already decided. Her room. She thought all right then, and went to make dinner. Their mother called on Christmas Eve. Ruth Callahan called at 7, when the office was warm, and Diane was doing something architectural with aluminum foil in the kitchenette, and the snow had started again outside, the gentle kind that made Cedar Ridge look like a photograph of itself. "Merry Christmas," her mother said. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Is it snowing?" "Yes, it's beautiful." "Good." A pause. "I've been thinking about what you told me. About Walter's letter. About the room." "Yes?" "About the part where he wrote I wasn't brave at all." Her mother's voice was measured, careful with each word. "I spent years being angry at him for keeping that secret, for not trusting me with it. And I've been looking at it the wrong way." "What do you mean?" "I was thinking about it as a choice he made about me. Whether to trust me, whether I was someone he could tell." A pause. "But it wasn't about me at all." "No," Nora said. "It wasn't. It was about what he could live with, what he couldn't look at directly. He was carrying it alone, because that was the only way he knew to carry it." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "He was afraid. He was always afraid of things that didn't look like things that scared people. He could fix anything physical, a pipe, a roof, an engine, but certain other things." She stopped. "I didn't understand that about him until very late." "He wrote about it," Nora said. "In the letters. About the 3 drafts he wrote to the police and threw away. About driving past Raymond Holt's building on the way to the hardware store. He understood exactly what he was doing. He just couldn't stop doing it. That's the saddest kind of knowing," her mother said. They were quiet for a moment. Outside, the snow came down. "Nora." Her mother's voice shifted. "I'd like to come. In the spring when the roads are better." "Come in April," Nora said. "The ridge looks different in spring. The trees come back faster than you'd think." "Just a room," her mother said. "Not 9. We have 14 others. 13, actually room 5 needs the fixtures replaced." Her mother laughed. "The full version, not the polite one. Tell Diane Merry Christmas." "I will." She hung up. She looked at Diane in the kitchenette doorway. "She's coming in April," Nora said. Diane absorbed this. "I'll fix room 5 before then." She turned back to the foil. "Dinner in 20 minutes. Tps. Thomas called in January. He said he'd been thinking. He'd spoken to an attorney about his name, about the practical aspects of returning to himself, which were more complicated than they might seem after 27 years of a different paper trail. He said he'd been reading everything from the investigation. He said he wanted to talk to Carla Birch, the reporter who had written the original piece, if Nora thought that was appropriate. She said, "Come whenever you're ready." He arrived on a Saturday in mid-February when the snow had gone, and the sky was the clear pale blue of a cold day with low humidity. He drove the green Subaru. He parked in the same spot he had in November. Rex went out before she did. She watched through the window as the dog crossed the parking lot, and Thomas crouched down and put both on either side of Rex's face. Rex leaned into his left hand. Thomas closed his eyes. He stayed like that. She gave him a minute. Then she went out. "Thomas," she said, because they'd moved past the last names in November, and it was time to stop pretending otherwise. He stood up, looked at Cedar Ridge. "You fixed the sign," he said. "My sister hired someone. I kept failing at it. The lamp in room 9, it's always on." He nodded. They went inside and had coffee at the desk. Good coffee now, from the machine Diane had sent from Portland, with a note that said the old one was an affront to the concept of mourning. They talked for 2 hours. He talked about Oregon, about the work he'd built there under a name that wasn't his grant writing, occasional articles for small environmental publications, Work that let him use his skills without the exposure that a real byline required. He talked about the people there who knew him as someone else, about what it meant to begin considering which parts of himself to bring back and which to let remain where they'd been built. "My name," he said. "Thomas Greer. I've been it strange. I answer to it when people say it. But it doesn't feel fully mine yet. It's been a long time to be someone else." "Yes." He looked at his coffee. "Carol calls me Thomas. Every time she says it, it's a little more mine." He paused. "She said that would happen. I didn't believe her. She was right." He looked at her steadily. "I want to write about it," he said. "What happened, the whole of it. Not as an accusation, as a record, the way I was trained to do it." He looked at the stack of letters in the metal box. "Walter's letters are part of that story. I know." "Is that?" "Yes," she said. Before he finished, "Use them." He nodded slowly. "I'll need time to do it right," he said. "The letters will be here," she said. "Take what you need." He came back twice more before spring. Each time he went into room 9 alone for a while. Each time he came out and they had coffee. The conversation went further each visit into 1997, into the specific shape of what had happened and what it had cost, into the journalism of it and the decades of echo after. He was composing it in his head. She could see that. Not the act of writing, the process before writing. The listening. The sitting with things before responding. The assembling of structure that could hold weight without collapsing. She understood that process. She'd been doing her own version since October. Ruth Callahan came in April. She drove up from Tacoma in a car Nora didn't recognize, arriving on a Thursday afternoon. She refused the offer of being picked up from the airport. Said she wanted to see the landscape coming in. She pulled into the lot and got out and stood for a moment, looking at Cedar Ridge. Nora came out. Her mother was 67. Same height as Nora. Same dark hair, though Ruth's had gone silver at the temples. The same slight squint against afternoon light. She looked at the motel with an expression Nora couldn't read at first. Then she recognized it, the expression of someone adjusting what they expected to feel against what they actually felt. "It's smaller than I remembered," her mother said. "When were you last here?" "Your grandfather's 60th birthday. You were 10. She looked at the sign, all its letters. Straight. He was so pleased about that sign when he first put it up. He'd saved up for it for 2 years. He would have been furious that half the letters fell off. He would have been absolutely furious, her mother said. And there was something in the way she said it, not bitter, not forgiving, just the plain recognition of someone who knew a person well enough to know exactly how they would have reacted to a specific small thing. They stood in the lot for a while. The April air was cool, and the trees on the east ridge had come back, the green startling after the bare months. "Can I see the room?" her mother said. "Which one?" 9. Nora walked her there, unlocked the door, pushed it open, stepped back. Her mother went in. She stood in the center and looked. The bed with the plaid blanket, the wooden chair, the desk with the registration card in its sleeve, the nightstand with the lamp burning, the brown coat on the hook, the suitcase under the chair. Carol's photograph of Thomas on the desk corner him in 1996, young and smiling. And beside it, a photograph her mother had sent in February, which Nora had placed in the room the week it arrived. Walter behind the front desk of Cedar Ridge, 30 years ago, smiling at whoever held the camera, young enough to be a shock. A man in his 50s standing behind the desk of his motel like someone who knew exactly where he belonged. Her mother looked at both photographs for a long time. Then she looked at the coat. She didn't touch it. "He called from here," she said softly. "Thomas Greer. He sat at that desk and worked. And Walter knew he was here. Yes, and let him stay. And let him stay. He could have refused the reservation. Made some excuse." Her mother turned around, but he gave him the room, and then felt terrible about it for 24 years. "Yes." Her mother looked at the coat again, then at the two photographs side by side. Thomas in 1996. Walter at 50-some in this motel belonging here. He was two things his whole life, she said. At the same time. The man who gave stranded travelers free rooms, and the man who signed a document he shouldn't have signed. I spent a long time wanting one of those to cancel out the other. She paused. Neither one cancels the other. That's the part I had to get to. Nora nodded. I think that's what the letters were, she said. Him trying to hold both things without letting either disappear. Her mother looked at her. He asked the right person, she said. She came out of the room slowly. They went back to the office and had coffee. Her mother stayed 3 days. She walked the motel. She sat in the office and went through the filing cabinet, not looking for anything specific, just learning the place. She went to the diner at the end of the main street and came back and said, "The pie is good." On her last morning, she stood at the keyboard. "Which one is 17, she said. Nora pointed. The plain brass key, the worn shaft, the last hook on the bottom row. Her mother looked at it for a moment. "What does it open now?" she said. Nora thought about it. About October and the count 16 rooms, 17 keys. About the door behind the ivy, about Thomas's coat on the hook and his tape in the drawer, and his name with no checkout date. About the box of letters under the floorboard, and the photograph of Walter smiling behind his desk, and Betty Fenn's father selling 80 acres he didn't need to sell, and Gus Vallow sitting 4 houses down for 10 years waiting for something to change. About the 17th key that had opened all of it. Everything, she said. Her mother looked at her, then nodded once the nod she gave when something had settled into place and she was done needing to discuss it. She drove back to Tacoma that afternoon. Thomas came in May with the article. Not published. A draft. 60 pages in a manila folder, printed double-spaced, which he set on the desk and then sat back and looked at the window while Nora read. She read it in an hour and a half. He'd called it, What the Room Held. It was about the 1997 scheme, not just the mechanism of it, the legal and financial architecture, but the weight of it. What it had meant to the families. What it had meant to Raymond Holt, who had fabricated the notices and spent 27 years keeping both sets of documents in a cardboard box. What it had meant to Gus Vallow, who had stopped investigating and watched the motel from 4 houses down for a decade. What it had meant to Walter Callahan, who had sealed a room and spent 24 years writing to someone he believed was dead. And what it had meant to Thomas Greer. Nearly 3 decades of a life lived sideways from itself, doing work he was good at under a name that belonged to someone who didn't quite exist, reading Fern Crossing news once a year to see if anything had changed. The last section was about Cedar Ridge, about the 17th key, about the lamp in room 9. He'd written, "Some things are kept not because keeping them is practical, but because they are evidence that something happened to a real person. The coat on the hook is evidence. The registration card is evidence. The blank checkout line is evidence. Not of a crime that evidence exists in other documents, in official records that will outlast all of us. The coat is evidence of a man. Evidence that he was here, that he did his work, that someone thought he was worth remembering." She read that paragraph twice. Then she looked up. Thomas was watching her. "It's honest," she said. "Is it, right? About Walter. He kept your name real for 24 years because he couldn't bring himself to be the last one who knew it. The article does the same thing for him." "That's right." Thomas was quiet. "I kept his name in," he said. "I almost took it out. In the 3rd draft. Good that you didn't." "Yes." He looked at the metal box, at the letters. Removing it would have been the same thing he did for 24 years. Making himself disappear from the part of the story where he belonged. "Both things," Nora said. "In the record, both things," he agreed. He submitted it to a magazine in June. They accepted it quickly, faster than he expected. He told her in a phone call that had the particular sound of someone still adjusting to something going the right direction. It ran in September, print and digital, with a photograph of Cedar Ridge taken from the highway. The motel in the morning light, the sign straight. The lamp visible through room 9's window. The headline, What the Room Held. The week after it ran, the phone rang 4 times with people asking about rooms. Not because the article had made Cedar Ridge famous. Not because of the story exactly. But because something about the photograph, the motel in the morning light, the lamp in the one window looked like somewhere you might want to stop. Nora answered every call. She booked 3 of them. On the last warm evening of September, she stood in the Cedar Ridge parking lot as the light went behind the western ridge. 6 rooms had guests, the fullest the motel had been since she arrived. The walkway was lit. The sign was straight. Betty Fenn's niece, who had a landscaping business in town, had come in late spring and put in a flower bed along the front walkway, not because anyone had asked, just because Betty had mentioned the motel, and the niece had said she had extra stock. The flowers had done well through summer, and were still putting up the last of their color in the September evening. Small things. None of them dramatic. The accumulation of people doing small things because they wanted to. Rex was beside her on the walkway. His back legs were slower. Now the vet had adjusted his medication in August, said it was age, said to keep him comfortable. She was keeping him comfortable. He still appeared beside her when she got up in the morning. He still lay under the desk. He still went to the parking lot and looked south on days she couldn't explain. Gus was visible through the diner window at the end of the main street. He'd started writing a column for an online local news outlet, small pieces about Fern Crossing, about what had happened and what had changed. He was good at it. He'd always been good at it. He just needed the right moment to start again. Diane had been down twice since spring. She'd replaced the fixtures in room 5. She'd repainted the door of room 7. She'd sent curtains for the office from Portland, after 3 weeks of remote deliberation, with a note that said only better. They were better. Nora had told her so exactly once and watched her not react, and then, 3 seconds later, when she thought Nora wasn't looking, smile. Carol had called 2 weeks ago. Thomas was talking to people in Oregon, she said carefully, one at a time, explaining who he actually was to the people who had known him as someone else. It was slow. Some of it was painful, but he was doing it. He'd told Carol that the article had made it easier, that having the record out there public, permanent, something you could hand someone and say, read this, and then you'll understand, had made the explaining feel less like a confession and more like a fact. Nora thought about that, about what it meant to have a record, not just for Thomas, for all of it, the families with their land records showing what they'd actually been paid and what the land was worth, Raymond Holt's pension being redirected, the paperwork filed, the county notified. Harris Caldwell's cooperation agreement in the official files of the county investigator's office, his name, the companies, the payments, the fabricated notices, all of it documented in a place that couldn't be sealed again. Caldwell's firm had quietly closed its doors in late spring. She'd seen the notice in the county records, no announcement, just a filing, the office address listed as vacant. She'd sat with that for a moment. Not satisfaction exactly. Something more like the shape of things being what they were. She looked at Cedar Ridge, the 2 rows of rooms, the walkway, the sign reading Cedar Ridge Motel, all letters present, lit from below by the ground lights Diane had installed in July, because she'd decided the sign deserved to be seen properly at night. And room 9, second from the end of the west wing, closed but not sealed, the warm light around the doorframe. She walked down the walkway. She unlocked the door. She went inside. The room looked the same as the day she'd first opened it. The coat on the hook, the suitcase under the chair, the registration card in its sleeve, the 17th key on the desk. Carol's photograph of Thomas beside the photograph her mother had sent Thomas at 34, Walter at 50-something, both in this place, both belonging here in their different ways. The lamp burning on the nightstand. She stood in the middle of the room. She thought about October, the Safeway parking lot in Renton, the $43 and the blazer she kept separate so it wouldn't wrinkle. The woman who had moved through the world in a way designed not to be noticed, not to take up too much space, not to make her situation more visible than it already was. She was still careful, still the person who noticed the details and stayed in the room through the hard parts. But she wasn't passing through anymore. Cedar Ridge was not a temporary situation. It was not a problem to be solved or a property to be assessed or a number to report back to a realtor. It was a place where someone had been wronged and where someone had tried, imperfectly and too late and in the only way he could find, to keep that wrong from disappearing entirely. And now it was a place where the lights were on and the roof held and 6 people were sleeping in clean rooms and the lamp in room 9 had been burning for 11 months. She had kept it burning. Not because Walter asked her to, though he had asked, in his way with the key on the hook and the room sealed and the letters in the box, but because once she understood what the room was, what it held, what it meant that it had been kept. She couldn't make herself be the person who turned the lamp off. She wasn't brave in any large sense. She'd been scared most of the time. She'd nearly taken Caldwell's money. She'd packed the car twice in her head and imagined driving away. She'd sat at the desk at 2 a.m, with the decision not yet made and her hands not quite steady. But she'd stayed, and she'd opened the door, and she'd left the light on. She looked at the 17th key on the desk, the plain brass, the worn shaft. She'd turned it in the lock in October, not knowing what was on the other side. She'd carried it in her jacket pocket for days before she understood what it had opened. She'd put it back on the hook and taken it down again, and held it in her hand in the dark and thought, what do you do with something like this? She left it on the desk, where it had been since the day she placed it there, where it would stay. She took one last look at the room, the coat, the photographs, the blank checkout line on Thomas Greer's registration card, which was no longer a story about a man who disappeared, but a story about a man who came back. She stepped out. She closed the door, not locked. She stood on the walkway in the September evening. Rex came to stand beside her, his shoulder warm against her leg. The last light was going behind the western ridge, and the 6 guest rooms had their lights on, and Gus was still visible through the diner window, and the flower bed still had color, and the sign said what it said, straight and fully lettered, lit from below. She turned and walked back to the office. She turned off the desk lamp. She turned off the walkway light. She left the lamp in room 9 burning. She sat down at the desk. The phone rang. She picked it up. Cedar Ridge Motel, she said. Can I help you? Outside, the September dark settled around the motel. The sign held its letters. The guest rooms held their guests. The walkway held its quiet. And in room 9, second from the end of the west wing, the lamp on the nightstand lit the coat on the hook and the key on the desk and the 2 photographs and the card with its blank line, and the light came around the edges of the door into the cold September night. Not a monument, not a museum,